Well, thank you very much for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to discuss this important topic. General Ham, thank you for the very kind introduction, and I appreciate your relationship with us and giving us guidance and encouragement and connectivity to industry. It's great being here because I get to see lots of friends and familiar faces. Pat McQuiston and I were office mates at one point way back when, and then I have my classmate sitting over here on the other side, Guy Swan. So it's always good to be back at AUSA. And of course, you pull out your three. Everybody knows the story of the three envelopes. First envelope, when things are going bad, you pull out is blame your predecessor. I'm in trouble. I can't do that. She's sitting here, so it's nice to see you again, Heidi. And I'll get the grading card at the end. Contracting. So contracting, Congress has given us a lot of flexibility in the acquisition arena overall. They're trying to provide us with some flexibility on best practices. How can we do some more creative contracting? How can we do some more creative approaches just generally to acquisition? One of my favorites is 804, which is essentially rapid acquisition authorization. If you really go back into the regulations, it's still authorized without 804. However, by them putting it in there, it says they support us doing that. We'll talk a little bit about things like OTAs, other transaction authority. In the regulation, in the law, something that we can leverage. Even on the Hill, you find some disconnects as to who's really supportive of that and who isn't. And I'll tell you that one of the things I'm going to make a point of is that they've given us the authority, and now it's our time to responsibly employ those authorities and not to misuse them. Misusing them just simply would be unreasonably extending them to applications that clearly weren't inside the intent of the original authorities as they were written. And I'll make a couple of points about that. But our objective is to take these authorities and the contracting authorities and try and leverage them to get things done faster and better. We want to make it a much more coherent relationship between the Army side of things and the contractor side of things. And there are some specific areas in my discussions with various members of the community that they would like us to consider, and we want them to consider. So I'm going to try and touch on a few of those. But we all know that there are some issues we need to deal with in the way that we do contracting on both sides. Now, one of the benefits you have is that I come from your side of the table. A short time ago, I was running my own company. It was a small enough company that I didn't have I did have lawyers, but they were really expensive, and I had to pay them. So if I could learn to read contracts, then that meant I didn't have to pay a lawyer to read the contract or to help me write up my responses to proposals, RFPs, and those type of things. So I became fairly adept at understanding contracts. Way back in the old days, I was a 3, and as a 3, I would often do something called go to graph. You got to go to graph. If I'm going to go to graph, I start in my office and I say, how do I get the brigade to Grafenberg? Okay. First thing I got to do is I've got to go attend the range conference. The second thing I have to do is I need to start planning my logistics strings. Who's going to go there? How many trucks? Can the trucks get inspected so they can get through the fire points? So for any of you that are operationally oriented, you'd understand this sequence. And I think that what we need to do is apply some of those same type of approaches to the methodology by which we look at contracting. We need to put some things first and some things last in our efforts in contracting. And you're going to hear me talk briefly about intellectual property as an example. We tend to think about it at the end, not at the beginning. Yet it causes us so much trouble at the end because we don't think about it at the beginning. And I know that from being on your side of the table, intellectual property and our rights within the government are critically important to making sure that you stay competitive in your area. But it's as important on our side of the table in making sure that we retain control of our destiny. What are a couple of direct issues that because I want to make sure I touch on all of these. Kind of some of these issues. Where are we? What's our thinking on some of these issues with respect to contracting, at least at the ASALT level? The first thing is we're beginning to take a look at how we've been doing contracting for the PMs and PEOs. So the first thing that happens is you put together your acquisition strategy and you put together a contracting concept. The general way we've attacked that is, okay, this is going to be a cost plus fixed fee, firm fixed price, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is frequently the work is not broken out that way. The work often is 80% predictable, deliver this, and then 20% not so predictable, and that's where the risk all is buried. However, in the past, what we've done is looked at it as a single contract. Do one thing. Now I know that General Simpson's sitting here going, "Oh cow, I got enough contracts actions to go through." He only has about 210,000 a year to do. So coming up with a better idea of having more contracts is not probably top on his list of things that he needs to do. But I will tell you, I'm supporting him and seeing if we can make this easier in general for him. But I want our contracting people to look at, or I want our PMs to work with their contracting people to look at this issue of what's the right contract mix for the work that we're trying to get done. We contract for all of you out there to do work for us. It may have multiple delivery issues, but we put it all into one contract. If any of it, and we tend to go to the most flexible contract. The most flexible contract tends to be a cost plus contract. So what happens is if it's a large enough contract and it's kind of cost plus related, everything goes on a cost plus. And so all of a sudden we have a loss of control over the delivery of those things which may just be straightforward deliverables. We take 100% of the risk when frankly, as an former industry guy, we had some responsibilities. I was supposed to deliver you lug nuts on the first of the year. Well, if I don't, it's cost plus. I'll just drive over a little bit, and that's okay. We'll catch up on it because probably something else will fall apart. I mean, I'm not being too cynical because I've seen both sides of that. And the end state is that all ends up government-related risk. And so I think the only reasonable and fair thing is let's separate out the risk. Those things that you can deliver better, faster, smarter. Let's negotiate out those pieces into a firm fixed price contract. Now, there's one contract I kind of like, which is a fixed price incentive fee. I don't mind if you make a profit. I think you should make a profit. I know not everybody agrees with me, but I would be happy to assemble a firm fixed price contract in a manner which, if you deliver an agreed upon product at an agreed upon time or earlier, you get to keep the money. Okay. Now, if you don't do it, then you start eating the money, and that's how everybody else out here. We've got 5,000 companies that sell to the government generally. Okay, and I've told everybody this. I know because I'm not allowed to have any financial relationships with them. So they give me literally a list, and it's about 5,000 companies long. The rest of the world is built by everybody else. Having done commercial work as well, one of the critical areas there is if I'm supposed to deliver something, we have to negotiate out what that deliverable is. If I can't deliver it in the negotiated, what I negotiated, I start eating that. And believe me, I've eaten a lot of dollars because I didn't manage that well enough on some of the tasks. The other side of it is I think that in the government, we've got tasks where generally what we're doing when we hire you in a cost-plus role, we're hiring you to be kind of quasi-employees. I'm sucking up all the risk. I'm paying all your salaries. I cover the cost of your buildings. I cover the cost of your overhead, your G&A. All of that gets rolled up into the price per hour or deliverable that we've got there. So if that's occurring, you're essentially an employee of mine in a theoretical manner. That's an appropriate way to look at it when you're supplementing a talent or skill set or capability I don't have internally and organically. So I need you to develop something. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to come out. We have to work together coherently. That's a great place for a cost-plus contract. So sometimes when we look at a contract, and we want to separate the two into two different pieces so that we can manage them separately. You take your risk, I take my risk. You're not going to make a whole lot of money on the cost plus piece as a pure profit, but you can make all the money that if you got the things, a good deliverable, and it's going to show up early and it's going to save you money for operating expenses, I'm all for it. Undefinitized contracts. We enter into them in order to get done quickly so that we can get on contract and we can move out. There are a number of reasons why we have undefinitized contracts. It's somewhat unique to the government. Generally, in commercial sector, if you can't definitize your contract, you don't enter into it. But we often have deliveries that are just, as I said, there are parts of them and we have to get this part done and not that part yet. So we get more involved with undefinitized components of the contract, and they become then a problem for us. We have 119 undefinitized contracts that are over 180 days. That's just, my first response was that's unacceptable. So I rooted around and said, let's go take a look at what this is caused by. And, of course, the first thing I do is I call a head of ACC and I go, why can't you get these things definitized? And actually I said, why aren't these things definitized? Let's look at them. And so we started rooting around. And it's both of our problem, okay? A big part of the problem is when we end up with an undefinitized contract, you have requirements for you to get in new costing data, okay? And we don't get it, and we don't get it, and we don't get it. And I'm going to take a look at the policy on that because, frankly, that's not a bad method of keeping us on a string for a long time. So, and we all work as partners, except not everybody does. Okay, and I'm not naive about this, and I want to be partners, and I want to do things good together. But sometimes you sit there and you wonder why I can't. Why is it that you can't seem to tell me what you told me on the last contract we closed again? And what we end up is in an undefinitized role, which generally UCAs cause us to extend the contracts. So we're going to try and end UCAs, or at least diminish them to a very small number. And I want to try and end all of them over 180 days. So if you're not getting them done because you're not getting your cost data in, then I'm going to take a look at the policy on that. OTAs, we've done quite a number of them. We've been pretty successful. I think you're going to be talking to the park from New Jersey today. That's sort of our center of the universe on OTAs, and has done a great job. This is one of those areas where we got to be careful about how we extend things a little bit too far. There's a great opportunity that if we compete the prototype phase of using an OTA, that as long as that was, if we prove out all of our requirements in the prototype phase, then currently the law says we can move directly into production without having to go through another recompete. We don't want to overstep that bound. So I don't think it's going to be more than an LRIP type of thing. There's still policy discussions trying to go on at that. so that we make sure that we don't do something like put in a $10 million OTA for a prototype, only to award a $1 billion OTA directly to the company that won the 10 million. And the reason it's the rule set that probably going to come along with this is if you do that, you're going to have to say you're probably going to do this. And the reason is because, you know, I may not compete. If I'm a big company, I may not compete for a $10 million, you know, OTA for this, because remember, you have to, if you're a big company in OTAs, you got to throw in a percent of the, contribute percent of your, the cost. So I'm not sure I want to bother with that. And for 10 million, because I'll never recover my cost on the volume of the $10 million contract. But if I win a $1 billion contract, I might. So if you don't tell them in the beginning, they don't bid. If you then turn around and say, you know what, we're going to do an $1 billion award, we get in protest, which is something that just happened to us. Okay, well, the DoD, not us. So we're trying to put some policies in place to make sure that that doesn't happen. Cost plus has a place, and I mentioned that. We're looking at some simplified actions for small companies. The barrier to figuring out how the heck to work with the military is just mind-boggling. It goes back to this go-to-grab thing. I don't know how many of you actually have done contracts specifically. Sit at your computer tonight and say, I want to sell to the Army, and move forward from there. Forget all the things that you know, all the niches about, and see how hard it is to get to that point. Like I said, 23 million companies, 5,000 of which do business with the military. We have to increase our vendor base, particularly for services, for small products, and those type of things. I've talked about intellectual property rights. I talked about, I gave an extensive discussion of that at the last meeting out in Huntsville, and I said we would be putting together a policy that will make it fairer for using intellectual property for you, fairer for the intellectual property for the government, and clearer. And I have the policy in my hand. We haven't quite hit the target on this one. It's going to take me a couple of rounds to get it right, because it sounds more like government stuff than commercial IP. So we'll get it right. And I think, because I'm kind of done with time here, I want your input. Our offices are open. If you want to see me, you can. I'm not going to tell you what day, because my wife calls in and tries to get on my calendar. I meet with probably 3 companies a week. Okay, my door is not closed to anybody, and those companies have been big companies and little companies. Okay, so I would tell you, come on, and I would tell you also that it's the same guidance I've given my PEOs and PMs, and I would propose it to the same thing to contracting people. Discussion is always better. Remember, let's see here. Make sure General Simpson, make sure I don't screw this up. A discussion is not a contractual arrangement. Okay, it's a discussion. And that's what we need to do so that we can figure out the best way to move ahead. I think my time's up. I don't know if that's helpful, but whatever you'd like, sir.
Wow, this is not a shy crowd. No, we've got some.
Sorry, I'm going to read it a little bit so I don't screw up handwriting. And in the private sector, the college and university space, and with many government agencies, oral interviews and discussions with actual clients occur. Not so on the service side of the Army. You rely almost exclusively on written proposals. In this town, there are lots of writers who can turn a sow's ear into a silk purse. Why do you choose not to go with an accepted best practice? Yes. So I sometimes get a little cheeky, perhaps fear. You know, if it's a little lawyerish, we behave a lot like lawyers. So this is the lack of conversation that occurs. It's a good point, and I'm not too sure exactly why or what the limits are. And it may just be an issue that we haven't defined what the battle space is. So I'll take that back with me, and we'll look at that. I don't know a good answer to that. We just do, I guess. But that's not necessarily what we should do. One of your predecessors, Heidi Shue, should I read the rest of this? Has used a metaphor for acquisition involving a bus on which every passenger has a steering wheel and a brake. As you move forward, how do you avoid lengthening the bus? I only have a PhD in physics. I think there's a little general relativity going on here to gravitational changes. Yeah, so when I was asked to consider throwing my hat in the ring and taking this, my first thought was, you want me to do that because you have to pick somebody, and that means you have to not pick somebody. So you want somebody that looks reasonable, and then you don't pick them. And so I figured I was that guy. So I was probably as astounded as some of you that I actually became the ASALT. It's a little bit like catching the bus that you're chasing. I spent a lot of time thinking, if only I was the guy in charge, I'd do ... I have pages of those ... This is an area that I totally agree with the Honorable Shue that this is a problem. There are two pieces to the problem. There's an internal piece and an external piece. The internal piece is PMs, PEOs, contracting personnel, and testers. Okay, those are the people that I have direct reach towards, that I can have some impact, and their culture. And I can affect some of that, and we are working to affect it. I mean, I've had a few people actually tell me that they've seen some significant changes in the last few months of openness on the part of the PMs and PEOs and other individuals. Even testers have actually kind of jumped on some of the bandwagons lately. So I think that the issue there is making sure you're clear in what your objectives are. Make sure they're logical. Show them that they're within the bounds of legal. Help people understand personal risk management. I've spent a lot of time, and I won't go through it here, but I've spent a lot of time not telling people just to take risk, but what that risk looks like. When is it acceptable risk and when is it not acceptable risk? I think that those type of things are things which empower the people that are working for you. So I've been trying to do that for the internal. Now there's always the external. Other people in the building who stomp on the brakes while you're trying to steer in a particular direction. I don't necessarily have control over that. Some of that is a little skill and gamesmanship in making sure people understand it. I don't know anybody in the building who's trying to be an obstructionist or hinder progress. They have various motivations for behaving the way they do or asking for the things that they do. They're all generally good reasons. But that doesn't mean that that's the final answer. And so you just have to work with those people who are stomping on the brake and help them to see that how you're hindering progress or you're inadvertently causing a problem. Often it's a second and third order effect. The biggest benefit is you got the secretary, you got the chief, you got the under, you got the vice. you have a very coherent group right now trying to figure out how to move things forward. So if you're stomping on the brake and it becomes apparent to one of those four, you may lose a leg. That's it. Good. Well, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.